idea. Until we got now both so big and powerful that neither one can lose to the other or win to the other. Animals will never get there. Somebody is always going to become better, and then somebody has to respond to becoming better. Well, that's where we got this huge, and do not memorize any of the names on here at all, but that's why we got this huge, kind of strange looking ecological habitat. Hox genes showed up, and they allowed for body parts to become maybe front limbs, middle limbs, and I started to get a mouth part and eye parts. Whereas before, all we were a bunch of individual proteins just floating around, minding their own business. But for some reason, we formed a colony or a group, and then our cells began to mutate, and we started to create then a multicellular organism. Don't memorize this, but I want you to realize is the importance of what Hox genes do. This goes back to talking about how Hox genes control what part of your body produces what. We found the genes. We found them on your chromosomes. And then we put little markers on those genes, and we find out that since genes produce proteins, as we make those proteins, they make the dye with them. And then we can find out what part of the animal gets those proteins. What we found is this pattern where this end of the chromosomes produce the head, followed by the neck, followed by the mid piece, followed by the end piece. And there's a certain pattern where, right, there's the purple part, there's the green part, there's the brown part, and there's the orange part. If you remove, well, we'll show you what happens. And mammals do the same thing, not just insects. Right? We found that the big difference, though, is animals, or I should say mammals, have made multiple copies of the Hox genes. We have 4 versions of them. Insects only have 1. We have 4 versions of them, but still the same basic pattern. The end of the chromosomes form the end of the living organism, like the head area. The next section would form then the neck region, along with the next section, and then the end section forming the end. And we know this is very consistent. So the Hox genes are determining the body plan of the animal, determining where your head is, where your eyes are, where your arms are, where your heart is. And how do we know it's really, really true? Now we're getting to the mean scientist part. On the left is your normal head of a fly. We then moved the Hox genes. We spliced them, we moved them around, and put them back in their genes. Let them produce babies. The antennae are right here. We moved the leg Hox gene to the head region. And now it has legs growing out of its head. That's how we know Hox genes control your body plan. How they control what part of your body becomes what. Now, I didn't do this. Okay? They've been doing this for a long time. But that's why you like to study flies. They have a 21-day generation life cycle. I can mess with their genes and see what happens as a result. And since they are an animal, I mean, insects are animals, it lets us study early forms of animal development and understand how we became what we are today. All right, here comes the nightmare of memorizing. Now, most of this that we're going to be going through, we're not going to have on this upcoming Thursday exam. Right? I want you guys to have time to learn this stuff. So I'll figure out by later today how far I want you to go to give you enough time to have a reasonable to memorize. But this is the consequence of them rearranging everything. I usually do this earlier if you have more time, even the Thanksgiving weekend, to memorize this stuff. So we got to go have a little faculty meeting about let's not do plants quite so early. But this is the order, in a sense, we're going to be looking at in terms of the different types of animals going from like computer programming, version 1 to version 2 to version 3 to version 4. Each version becoming more complicated, more complex, and more specialized. So start off with your fun task of how do I have to memorize the information? Well, I know there's 2 major groups of animals. One group called the invertebrates. Another group called the vertebrates. What makes an animal a vertebrate? Does anybody know? You have a backbone, exactly, a vertebrae. Then if you look at the numbers of different types of animals out there, how many are vertebrates and how many are invertebrates? 95% of our animals are invertebrates. They don't have backbones. Only 5% of us have backbones. That's all you really need to do right now on this one slide. Two major groups of animals, invertebrates and vertebrates. What makes you a vertebrate is that you have a backbone. What makes you an invertebrate is you don't have a backbone. How many of the animals are? 95 compared to 5%. Do not memorize this just yet. All right, you'll do that as the next couple of lectures go through. So that you're going to need to know for sure for this upcoming exam. All right, this puts it in what's called a phylogeny, or an order of common ancestors. And it shows us the nice order from simple to a little more complex, a little more complicated still, more complicated, more complicated, more complicated, more complicated, more and more. Then we come down here and we have to do like primates and humans and stuff way down here. But this is a nice order of who is the more complicated. This is the order we're going to go through slide by slide, animal by animal, over the next couple of lectures. So do not memorize this whatsoever. We're going to be coming back to it to refer to some ways of separating out our animals in terms of the types of tissues or the shape of the animal. They're called their body plan. All right, so here's the first thing. This is about body plan. Some animals have what are called radial symmetry. What does that mean? No matter how you cut, like a pizza or a pumpkin pie, both sides are always the same. I could cut it this way, and both sides are the same. I could cut it that way, and both sides are the same. No matter how you cut it in half, both halves are identical. That's called radial symmetry. Now, think about a shovel or a lobster. If I want two equal halves, I have to cut it in just the right way. I can't cut it this way, when one end's the handle and one end's the spade. I can't cut a poor lobster in half, because then one part's the edible part and one part's the non-edible part. But if I want two equal halves, there's only one way to cut it. It's right down the middle of its length. That's called bilateral. Because what does bi mean? Two. And what does lateral mean? Sides. Two sides. Two sides that are identical, in quotes. If I took Elizabeth here and stood her up and took a Saw 3 power saw, right, for the horror movies, and cut her right down the middle, she's not actually equal in halves, because your liver's over here. It's not over here, right? Your heart's right over here. Your spleen and pancreas are over here. But overall, right, I've got two eyes, one in each side, two nostrils, one in each side, two ears, one in each side, hemispheres of the brain, equal design of the heart, right? So in a sense, we are bilateral. One arm on each side, a leg on each side. So we are a bilateral organism. All right? A little more practice of the embryonic development. So here we have, for example, gastralization happening here. We're starting to now fold inwards to create multiple layers. And in this sense, we're looking at a body plan where you have only 2 layers compared to a body plan where you have 3 layers of tissue. Right? We're going to have the ectoderm, the endoderm, and the mesoderm in here. Let's stop it with that one. And we'll pick this up on the next lecture. We're going to look at, in a sense, the idea of body cavities in relation to their embryonic development. So I'll send you guys later today a little bit of a study guide to think about how to look at the animals